Many thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. One of the lesser understood and spoken about features of modern day digital cameras has to do with light metering modes. Back in the film days, photographers had to carry with them a completely separate device to meter the light for a particular scene in order to achieve a proper exposure. But with digital photography, all cameras today have a light meter built in that provides multiple different methods for metering light for a given scene. But with so many different options to choose from, which metering mode will give you the best exposure for what you're wanting to photograph? That's the question we're going to answer in this video. Now, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about here, metering is how your camera evaluates the light of a scene to determine the correct shutter speed, aperture, or ISO to use in order to achieve a proper exposure. And I throw up air quotes here because what a proper exposure is to your camera is something that's called 18% gray or middle gray. That's what your camera is trying to achieve from an exposure perspective. Now, I could sit here and just explain to you verbally the different types of metering modes and which is best for landscape photography or whatever type of photography that you are into. But I find that the best way to really understand this is a more hands-on approach. So if you could just pause this video for a minute and grab your camera and make sure you want to make sure that you have a lens attached to your camera body in order to do this. So once you have your camera ready to go, obviously unpause the video and just go ahead and turn it on and go into your camera settings. And it's going to be probably in your camera, the shooting mode or shooting menu within your camera, and find wherever the metering adjustments are made. Once you find that, go ahead and open up that area and you'll more than likely will see 4, maybe 5 different metering options available. Go ahead and look through those and look for something that is called center weighted metering. Now, you want to make sure that you have your camera in either aperture priority or shutter priority. I always like to do this in aperture priority. I feel like that's the best way to really understand the different types of metering modes that'll help you identify which is best for what you're wanting to do. But when you open up your metering mode, click on something that says center weighted metering. Of course, there's so many different camera brands out there. The nomenclature could be a little bit different, but more than likely if it has the word center or weighted, find that and click on that. And once you go ahead and identify that, you'll more than likely see a giant circle in the center of your screen. And what that is basically doing, and that is you telling your camera that this area in the center of my frame is by far the most important aspect of what I'm photographing, and that is what I want you to meter the light off of, just that center area. And when you have that selected, you'll notice that as you move this around, and a great way to really see this is to point it towards a light source. So if I point it up here to anything that's bright, you'll see that shutter speed will change. If you bring it down to something that's darker, you'll see that the back of your camera, it completely changes. It'll brighten and you'll see that shutter speed change again. If you change it to another light source, once again, but no matter where you move this at your camera, the area that is in the center is basically changing the area that is being metered. So you're basically telling your camera that you can go ahead and evaluate the scene, but I want you to put the most weight in the center of the photograph. So that's what's called center weighted metering. Now, if you go back to your metering section of your camera, you'll also more than likely see something that's called spot metering. So if you click on spot metering, and spot metering is really cool. I find it to be a little bit more useful than center weighted because center weighted, you don't have the ability to move it. It is in the center of your frame. You can move your camera around, but that metering mode is always going to be locked in the center of your frame. But what spot metering does is it basically gives you the ability to move your focus point anywhere you want, and it will use that focus point as the area to meter. So if you put your focus point, let's just say all the way in maybe the bottom left-hand corner of your frame, and then you put a bright light source in that bottom left-hand area of your frame again, you'll notice that the shutter speed is changing. You'll see that the entire scene on the back of your camera is changing. And if you move your focus point to say maybe the upper right-hand corner of the frame, and you put that area on a light source, you'll notice that it is changing once again. And you can see your shutter speed changing in the bottom left-hand corner as well. So it's really cool to really experience it like this, because not only are you seeing the actual change on the LCD, you'll see the entire scene get darker, you'll see the entire scene get brighter, but you can also look at your shutter speed as well, because you'll see that will get very fast. You'll see it'll get very slow. But that is what spot metering is basically gives you the ability to put that spot anywhere in your scene, and your camera is going to focus on that area as far as the location to go ahead and take its metering, to evaluate for exposure. And that's very, very handy. Now there's more options to choose from here. You will also probably have something that is called highlight weighted metering. Highlight weighted metering, it's a metering mode that I don't really use too often. And it doesn't give you any kind of a different look on the back of your LCD, but it's basically you just telling your camera that the highlights in your scene are what you want to base your exposure off of. Or another way to say it, an easier way to understand it is, you're basically telling your camera to make sure that you protect those highlights at all costs. It is good for landscape photography, but what happens a lot of times is it will always protect those highlights, but you'll find that it will usually drastically underexpose your photograph because it is trying to protect the highlights, which is almost always going to be in the sky of your scene. So that is another option. When you have highlight metering enabled, if you put your camera to any kind of a light source, you'll see how dark that the screen gets. You'll see that the shutter speed changes as well. Now the fourth option here is more than likely going to be something that's called matrix metering or evaluative metering, just depending on what camera brand you have. And basically what this does, once again, doesn't give you any kind of a different look on the back of your LCD, but it's basically metering the entire scene. So it's going to meter everything. It's going to create usually the most natural type of a look. It's good for most situations really, but it's basically taking every single aspect of your scene into account in order to determine the overall exposure. So it's not putting any additional weight on the center. It's not putting any additional weight on wherever your focus point happens to be. It's basically just evaluating the entire scene in its totality, if you will. So the big question is, and I hope that was helpful. I find that I was explained metering modes many times throughout my career, and I never really understood it until someone explained it to me like this. They're like, hey, Mark, just grab your camera and walk through this exercise with me. And within just a few minutes, I was like, I 100% get it. I hope that was really helpful for you as well. But the big question is, which one of these is best for the type of photography that you are into? So generally speaking, if let's say you're a portrait photographer, a lot of times portrait photographers like to use center weighted metering because oftentimes your subject is near the center of your frame or maybe in the exact center of your frame. And if it is a person's face, you probably will want to meter off of that person's face because that person is by far the most important subject in your entire frame. So you want to meter exposure off of the person's face. So center weighted metering is pretty popular. It doesn't have to be a person. Maybe it's wildlife, maybe it's a horse, or maybe it's just maybe a volcano in the center of your scene. Whatever the case may be, if the most important aspect of your photograph is in the dead center of your scene, maybe you do want to use center weighted. Now, if you are, maybe once again, we'll go back to portrait photographer. If you are wanting to use the spot metering, let me change this back to spot metering, and you want to do this because maybe the subject of your scene is not in the center of your photograph. Maybe the subject in your scene is in the upper left-hand corner or bottom right-hand corner or anywhere that is not in the center of your frame. Maybe you want to have the ability to move that focus or move that metering anywhere in the photograph that you want. You might want to use spot metering. Now, if you are, let's say, wanting to use the highlight weighted metering, I personally, like I mentioned a few moments ago, I've never used highlight metering before. I do feel like there is a solid use case for landscape photography. The bad thing is, like I mentioned before, it will always, for the most part, underexpose your photograph more than you really would like it to. Now, matrix metering, I do believe, is probably the best approach to go if you are solely an outdoor and landscape photographer. That's usually what I have my camera set in. I'd say 90% of the time is matrix or evaluative metering because it's basically metering for the entire scene. And in landscape photography, generally speaking, the entire scene is very important. Yeah, there are certain aspects of your scene that are the main subjects, but the entire scene is generally very, very important. So I usually like to meter across the entire scene in order to help my camera determine exactly what is the best metering mode. Now, if you generally don't shoot in aperture priority or shutter priority and you always shoot in manual mode, you will not you won't see these different metering modes change your shutter speed or change your aperture because you're not in one of those priority modes. But you will see, let me change my camera over here into manual mode. You will see the actual light meter on the, well, on my camera, it's on the right side of the screen. And as you move it around, you'll see that will change. The light meter will say it's too bright or maybe it's too dark. And then you base your exposure off of that. So that is a real quick rundown as to the different types of metering modes available. Like you said, or like I said earlier, they can be a little bit confusing, but I feel like when you walk through it in a more hands-on approach, it will instantly click for you. I know it definitely did for me. Now, before I do wrap things up here, I do just want to say a big thanks to the sponsor of this week's video, which is Squarespace, who I use for all of my website and e-commerce needs. Squarespace provides a robust and beautiful online platform to develop your website. You can showcase your photography using Squarespace's design intelligence, combining 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise with cutting-edge AI technology to unlock your strongest creative potential. And with Squarespace's online store feature, you'll have access to all the tools you need to start selling your physical, digital, or service products online immediately. You can even use Squarespace payments to easily get started in just a few clicks and start receiving payments right away by providing your customers more ways to pay with many of the most popular payment methods available today. So if you're looking to start a new website or possibly upgrade your current website, check out squarespace.com/Mark Denney for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase. So metering modes, it doesn't really have to be super complicated. I think that the nomenclature metering is a little bit confusing. I know it was confusing for me, but I really hope that kind of once you walk through this hands-on experimentation, it'll instantly click for you and be like, okay, I 100% get what metering modes are. I 100% get what each different metering mode is doing. And I 100% get which metering mode I should be using for the genre of photography that I am doing at a particular time. So I really do hope that that information was helpful. If you do have any questions about anything that was covered here, please leave those in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to get back in touch with you as soon as humanly possible. And if you did enjoy this week's video, if you could, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed already, and as always, I really do appreciate you carving out a little bit of time to spend it with me here today, and I will see you all next Wednesday. Bye.